Okay, doke. Hello, everyone. Right, this is part four, I believe, and the third part of us painting. I haven't done any. Well, I say I haven't done anything. I'll show you in a minute what I have done today. No more going forward on the skins exactly as it was left last week, and today I'm going to start working on his uh, dangly tutu, whatever you want to call it, and there's a belt as well. So they're kind of going to be leathery brown materials, but want them to look a bit different to one another. Now, interestingly, hang on just a sec. It looks like, yeah, Stephen posted a picture of where his has got to, and pretty much, although there'll be some slight differences, he's done what I'm planning to do in terms of colours for those areas. So, but what I've done, but I'm also going to utilise the dry brush in this. So what I've done, I've practiced on the back of this. So that's what I've done so far. I'm not sure how close we can get in. So that's. I'm just going to zoom in briefly.
It's the artist's opus brushes that we were donated, yeah?
Yes. So in theory, you have those brushes. Now, this is interesting. I think what you can see when you look at this is, can you see the horizontal lines at the bottom? Now, I think those are kind of printing line relics that dry brushing kind of accentuates a little bit. But yeah, the intention was to use a dry brush and then do other things on top of a dry brushing. I tend, not to do dry. I don't do a lot of dry brushing, but it has its place. So I'm going to kind of try and carry on this through the rest of that round the front. But it gives a deep shade areas and shadows and highlights as well in there. So and then you can see the belt as well, that I've begun doing some kind of texture at the top to make it look a little bit more interesting than what it actually is. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back out and go back to this. So yeah, I'm on
Rob,
palette.
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hiya. Question is, did you try using the texture palette that came with them before you kind of practiced on the back? Did you try that?
No, I didn't. I just ended up actually using some. I ended up just doing it on a bit of kitchen paper. In fact, there's still some residual paint on there. Look, even though I thought I cleaned it. So there you go.
But you could, if you wanted to.
Yes, you definitely could. I mean, it's actually so lovely. You almost don't want to do it, but I might try. Yeah, I'm going to have that down and experiment while we're here. But yeah, first thing I'm going to do, I've got on the palette here the leather brown, some parasite brown, and the ever useful black brown at the bottom, and then the other two I'll mention in a bit. So we're going to start off with. I'm just going to give it an initial base coat of the almost a mix of these three colours, but keeping it on the dark side, because dry brushing, I wouldn't say works best, but the principle is you're going to, in theory, do light over dark, but equally you could do dark over light depending on what effect you wanted to do. So I'm just going to very quickly on the front paint these here. I still can't work out what it's trying to be, but I'm kind of treating it as a leathery material of some description. It probably isn't. It's got an element of texture I can just about make out, but if anyone has any ideas what it might be. But this is kind of close to the artwork that we see as well. I also wanted to keep these colours a little bit more on the yellowy orange side, as opposed to the red of the leather, of the reddish colours of the leather of the belt. So they're browns, both are browns, but they're just different elements of brown. Exactly. It's actually quite fun with this to not be trying to get a perfectly accurate colour. You could even muck around and every now and then, even while it's still wet, introduce a bit more darker into it, and then have that paint wet on wet while you're doing this base coat with so you can see there I've got a little bit more of a black brown in it. That's all going to disappear at the end of the day under the dry brushing and the highlights and the texture we're going to do. But what it does do is it creates a bit of interest that a lot of the time you don't even realise is going on, but it will. You can do that on the skin. You can do it, muck around with colours when you're applying the base colour, especially on a fantasy subject like this. I wouldn't necessarily do it on a historical piece. Looking
at all the artwork on Google, concept art, and other people who have done similar figure, it just looks like leather strips all around.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of doing it as a kind of a leathery kind of effect, and we are getting. This is one of the annoying parts: is trying to get to certain bits. So getting the angle to get your paintbrush in. In some ways, where I was doing it on the back there, I'm not too concerned how. When it goes under the hand, for example, if it stays dark under there, that's fine. Nobody's going to pay attention to that, because we're going to have a hand and a axe hilt in the way. A little bit trickier on this side. But if you can get there without buggering up your green, that's cool. And then how to deal with the underside there. Can you hear the telly in the other room?
No.
Good. I've had it on because, as I was saying earlier, I have one dog that really doesn't like fireworks. And so anything that will probably be worse when we do this next week because it's closer to the actual day. And it's random fireworks, it's the problem.
Yeah, sure.
If you know when fireworks are going to happen, you can kind of ready yourself for it and prepare them. And the big ones are usually at the weekends anyway. So, But next week, is it the 6th? We've got one. So no, 7th. It'll be the 7th, won't it? So a couple of days after the official day. So yeah, just a little base coat there, and it will dry hopefully. Now, what do I want to do? It's going to take some of the darker on its own, and so this is the black brown on its own.
You were saying about the scratches and how you can see the manufacturing lines.
Oh, the lines, yeah.
Was that something is like a happy accident? Give it an old leather look, or was
no? I'd rather it wasn't there, because it goes across.
I see.
If it strips, it's going across and is at the same level on things, unless I turn that into some form of pattern on it, which for this kind of character I can't really see. It wouldn't make sense. Yeah, that was. I'm not treating it. That's just annoying because it's not on the front. I can't. Well, at this point, I can't see it on the front. But dry brushing can produce text or reveal texture, I should say.
So, what would you do to combat that? Would you fill it?
Well, if I sand it down, if I knew it was there, I didn't know it was there. But if I was painting it and not dry brushing it, this is a pitfall of dry brushing because it does bring that texture up. If you're shading it and highlighting it, I'd be painting downwards through that, and it wouldn't be so obvious because you'd be applying paint in that sense. So okay, so right, I really need that to dry properly. Now, dry brushing. Of the Artisophus dry brushes, given the size of these dry brushes, the two big ones are way too big to do anything on here. They'd be good on vehicles and things. That's one of the issues with dry brushing is moisture, and certainly what I think I don't tend to use dry brushing in the figure modelling because I use acrylics, and acrylics are difficult to get dry brushing to work well because they thin with water and all that kind of stuff. I think the classic one you can get better. I historically have had better dry brushing results using enamels. The classic one was always take the thick enamel gloop from the bottom of the tub and use that to dry brush, or oil paints, which is a different, because it's a softer, creamier texture. That dry brushes in a different way. And while I'm waffling, I'm waiting for this to dry as well. But with acrylic paints, because of the water base, that you get any moisture in it, they thin before you realise it. And I was experimenting with this quite a while ago, and I can still feel the moisture in this brush. But I have tried to take paint from the deepest portion of these pots and deliberately didn't mix them up normally and use a cocktail stick to dig out the gloopiest stuff, except this one, because that's got a lid on in a different way. And the intention being that I utilising that enamel element method of having a thicker paint gives you better dry brushing. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to add more of the lighter colours, so more of the orange in and more of the leather brown. Now I'm going to mix that with a different brush so that I can keep this dry. Now there is no, well, I'll do it on this piece initially. I'll get that wooden palette thing in a minute. So I will test. I don't want to use a lot. This is a very light touch, and you can see how that's just coming off. The other disadvantage with using acrylics is that they dry quickly, in the way that enamels and oils don't, when I think about it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, while avoiding bits I've already painted, is just kind of scrub so it catches the upper surfaces. And like on here, you can see how it's mostly at this top bit, but I've still got some on the bottom. We're kind of using this to help. I didn't know that, LJ. there are acrylic dry brush paints. I haven't read the full message yet, but
yeah, LJ saying that he's watching is there's acrylic dry brush paints that are supposed to be geared directly to dry brushing. They are acrylics,
okay.
So there's Games Workshop and Ammo brought some out
Okay.
reasonably recently. The properties of which I don't know, but
No,
maybe they take longer to dry, so they sit on the brush longer. But
they might be thicker as well.
They are super thick, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm still keeping it closer to the belt area, and you can see where that colour has picked up slightly. It's quite, when you run into an area over here where it's quite a thin area of skirt, it's quite tricky to keep it just on there, but I'm still being delicate with even using a technique like this. Yeah, once upon a time it was almost a super scrubby kind of motion.
I guess less is more, is it?
Yeah. At the moment here, I'm just kind of adding a bit of colour to it. I'm going to, on the palette, just add a little bit more of these lighter tones. So it's less black completely, and take most of the paint off. That is the first thing, and then I'm going to go back, and again I'm just going to try and keep this on the upper surfaces again. And you can almost, it doesn't have to be a dry brush as such. You're using this almost for texture as well, so I'm maybe a little bit too much on there. I can hold on, that's right. You can also use it with a slight stabbing motion, and you get quite a pleasing texture with it.
Yeah, especially for leather, different scratches and things.
But again, still trying to keep it on the upper portion. So the same principle I use all the time is thinking about where the light is coming from. So I kind of want this to capture on the upper surfaces.
I think with the dry brush palette, you should use it the other way around, so that you're hitting the texture of that logo, and probably prime it first.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah, so you can test the level of dry brush on your brush before you basically put it on the kitchen roll. That's the idea.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But you can put primer on it, so repaint it.
It looks too nice to do that.
Well, you'll have to repaint it every time, or buy two.
Or buy two. Yeah. So yeah, you can be as crazy or as delicate as you want with this. My intention is still this is still kind of early days for this. I mean, in itself, that's still fine and that's lovely, but you've all seen what I do. That's not quite the end of what I'm going to do. So I'm also going to do a little bit on the ends, just on the bottom, just because it adds a bit of interest. So it's mainly at the top, but also a little bit at the bottom.
What it's also quite good for is picking out where the actual highlights would be, the base parts.
Yeah, oh yeah. This is definitely I'm partially doing it for that purpose here. And I'm still going to go back and I'm going to add, I'm still going to shade and highlight just as I normally would after I've done this. What I've also got on the palette, by the way, is this is on the right elf skin tone, and on the left is the beige. Now I'm going to add a tiny amount of beige into the mix to make a bit more of a highlight, and I'm going to take a lot of that, even less on the brush for this purpose, because I really do just want this to pick up purely on the absolute top. So I'm being very, very, very gentle with this. And I'm doing it just at those upper light catching areas. Right. You can see it's still a way to get a little, it's still overall darker. Now, I'm going to probably come back and use this, so I'm not going to put it in water to clean it just yet. So what I'm going to do is now I'm now going to take some of this lighter colour I've been using, and just as I've done before, is now, like I say, I'll reinforce the fact that you can leave it exactly like this. This is perfectly okay. It looks pretty decent. I'm going to try and get a little bit more out of it for my purposes to keep it in tone with the rest of the figure in the way I've painted that. So what I'm going to, I'll...
It certainly gives a totally different texture in the skin, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, like I say, I'm now going to do some brush highlights over top of the dry brushed areas. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to do it because by doing it less of a glaze, and I'm also almost doing it like a very thin lines, almost sketching over top, which will accentuate the... So I'm going, these are drawing little right angles to the flow of that highlight area there. So, but I'm doing it in such a way that they look like texture of a material as opposed to a linear highlight, like doing these areas up here. So almost dot work, which is kind of accentuating the dry brushing element of it. And to me, that just adds a little bit more shape and character to it, which I can't emphasize enough. It's all down to what you want. So for me, this ends up being a little bit more pleasing. Because one of the things here, and this surface, where we gone? Where that belt buckle bit comes out, there's a surface here. Now with dry brushing, only picks up the edge. With the way I paint and the way I like painting, there's an area here which didn't get the dry brush because the dry brush couldn't access it because of the angle. So I'm putting a little highlight in there, just so it remains in keeping with how I paint and how I like the highlights to go. So that's just a personal thing, and
yeah.
If we let me just zoom in to see. I'll try and get my hand still as well. You can see, so that side is untouched and dry brushed and looks really good. Quite like the way that's come out. But this side, I'm adding a little bit more highlight and texture to it, just to when you look at him in the context of the whole figure, kind of keeps in keeping with that. So yeah, I'm just going to go through and do a little bit more on this side. Right. There we go. You don't. So it's funny, isn't it, that with a technique like the dry brushing, we probably make much quicker progress than if you necessarily brush painting. Even though, yeah, now I'm going into the little bit more finessey approach. But
it's certainly a quick technique, and it has its place.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were doing, large diorama areas.
Oh, definitely. And the base is that's crying out for some dry brushing elements to that base. I would say as well is that because I'm not used to, because I don't dry brush regularly, I had to experiment a little bit. So this bit at the back, that was attempt number 2. I did paint it over with black and begin again because I didn't like the way it went, or didn't quite like the colours. And so, but if you look, when you are painting this, you can see in this strange leathery shapes there is a texture, and it's possible to do, I think that a little bit more, if you've got a good pointy brush. You can almost sketch kind of random lines the way I was describing before, and pick out, if you look here on this one, the dry brushing has brought out a little divot and a hole.
Yep, we can see that.
And you can, if I put a little highlight at the bottom edge, you can see that that's now drawn attention to that.
That's a bigger hole now.
It looks deeper because the light is coming down and has got the bottom edge of that. And in theory, now that exists as a physical divot. Now I should be able to, yeah, and there's another one here which I can do on the other side there. And we should be able to do that on other places as well, even if there isn't necessarily a divot there, because it will just create that kind of almost a 3D shape and texture in things that don't necessarily have them.
So with that divot, you're highlighting the bottom edge of it?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So if you imagine so I'm doing that edge with a highlight.
I see. Yeah.
So that's catching the light coming down. So and that's, yeah, I could do that in places in theory. Let me just see if I can do that. Right, I'm going to get some of a darker tone for my palette. And I am going, there we go. In here, I'm just going to put a little two dark spots. No, not quite. This is a good way of doing kind of battle damage scratches on anything, really. So I can do dark marks in other areas, and then if you're doing battle damage and scratches on a Space Marine armor, if you do a dark color of the base, there's a little scratch, and at the very bottom of that scratch, do a highlight. You can create 3D scratch effects, which just add, and on something like this leather effect, it will end up making it a lot more interesting than what the actual thing looks like. Excuse me just a second, I'm not sure if I haven't. Let me bring the camera lens a quick clean just in case that might help show some of these bits up a bit more. I'm going to go back to that. So I've just got bad. So in theory, you can see those little lines and things I've painted on there, creating just a little bit more, and that divot, creating. Where are we? Yeah, so that's the one I put the highlight in underneath, and then there's some little lines in places, and that makes that look. And there's a few more in here, and that just makes it look a little bit more interesting than the dry brush surface. At the end of the day, it's
yeah, gives it a bit of narrative, a bit of story as well.
Yeah, a bit of texture, a bit more texture than what there is. So, like, say these aren't. Oh, I've still zoomed in, so I'm going to. So yeah, they. For me, these are the kind of fun bits because you start seeing little interesting things, and you can. The nice thing about this is. Oh, sorry. The nice thing about this is that you can go. If you do too much, it's very easy, or if you overdo it and you don't like it. And one thing we're going to just to illustrate where Rob is a hole at this, is that you can do a little glaze or a filter of the brand color or whatever it might be, just to tone it down and reduce those highlights if you think you've gone too bright, to know how far to take those kind of effects. You might overdo it to start off with. You might put too much beige in there, too much of the highlight color, and hate what you've done. But like I say, you can always, if you go too bright, you can put a glaze of, say, that middle color, so the black brown with some of these mixed in, thin it right down till it's almost imperceptible color in it, and then do not a wash, don't let it flow into creases, but paint it as if you were painting a base coat, an even cover over top, and it will tone down those highlights and make it a lot more subtle.
Isn't that what you did with the skin a couple of episodes ago?
Yes, it's a classic miniature painting methodology kind of thing. It's people will do that all the time to blend and do those kind of little effects. That's quite nice. I quite like that. I'll show that in a minute. If you do some of these lines in random directions, it really does help make this look like almost a living, not living, but much more organic piece of material as opposed to something regular. It could well have been be the skin of something at one point in time.
I guess that's what you can kind of conjure up as you're painting it, can't you?
Absolutely,
those sorts of little stories.
Yeah. Right, what I'm going to do here is just get. I'm just going to get a little bit of black from that set, and tiny little bit on the palette. Don't need a lot because I don't want to use it as a black. I just want to add some of my brown black to the black to make, and thin that down. So the black brown isn't quite dark enough for the shadows I want to do here. So, well, not for shadows. I'm going to. It's tricky to see, but on this back side, the rear, I kind of want to. Like I say, I'm going to thin this down, and I'm going to go a little bit more thin than I might want to do, just to make sure I don't overdo it. I can always add more, and just where the material is coming up to the belt, where it's clinching, I'm just going to put some dark paint in there to kind of accentuate that shadow. And the way I interpreted this is that this is kind of bits crossing over. So some areas there's a gentle fold, and then some areas like there there's a strong. So there's almost like a Roman skirt thing on Roman armor. They have different. So that's one section of leather, and then there's another section hanging down with some darker points separating them, and that's my interpretation of this. Quite awkward. So here I can go black all the way up and separate that portion out. Harder to work out is one there, and do black all the way down just to separate out those zones. That might be one there, so maybe one in here. So like I say, these aren't super black at this point, but they are darker, so some of these sort of bits are a little bit darker than others.
Yeah, I see. So you're picking which parts are higher and which parts are lower.
Yeah. Almost lining, and this bit here. And because it's thin, it's not going to come out solidly as black, and unless I keep going back over it. More layers will and again in kind of reverse to the highlights, I'm also going to do some little textures or thin lines, as I did with the highlight portions, just to add more shape and texture.
Are you going to use this same brown for his gloves?
Don't know, actually. I hadn't even thought about that. Don't know.
It's not got a matching set then.
Well, it was a thing. It could be the belt colour.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't quite decided. I haven't quite decided on that yet. I think that bit of the belt as well will end up being some metallic. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it's not a leather belt, and maybe it's a leather thing with a material bit on the end there. Don't know. So when you when I go into kind of paint bits, and you go into different angles to get other bits, you can keep poking yourself with these blooming horns when you're doing it.
You always cut them off, pin them.
I could, but I won't. Now, when I look at this now, and I quite like the texture that's coming from it. It's probably better than it is on the back. I'll be inclined to. You could almost, because of the subject matter, you might put a texture like this on a leather knapsack or something that you're putting on a historical figure, or a tarp, or something on an AFB, and you might not go quite as crazy, but with a fantasy figure you can go a bit bonkers in terms of overdoing the texture. It doesn't matter if you go a bit aggressive with the amount of texturing you're doing. In fact, that's quite a fun thing to do. You can practice techniques that you might do more subtly on a historical piece. It's the same technique, you're just reining in the severity of it when you're doing something historical, because it needs to be a bit more real worldy. I'm just going through here with some of the black and the dark brown, and just on these undersides, which I guess you'd say are in shadow, and just doing those, separating them against the skin, so that there's a nice delineation between the leather bit and any skin tones, while carefully and hopefully not painting over the skin. But that's all. I always quite like that when you get to the point where you've got two different colours next to one another.
Well, it's not just two different colours, it's two different textures.
Yeah. So you've got your skin, and then you've got this. Let me just go back in.
Unless, of course, he's got leathery skin.
And you could do that as well. You could give him scars in his skin with that technique. But you can see the different textures and things going on there. And that's looking pretty decent. I'm quite pleased with that. And it's kind of in keeping. I think I've used the same colours as the back. I could possibly have a bit more fun and go for some more highlights. But yeah, still got the light coming down. I could probably do some more on the top. But I think we're coming up to the break now, timing wise. So I'll probably leave it here for now and do a little bit more before doing the belt in the second half.
Mm-hmm. Can you zoom back out a bit?
Yeah, sure.
Lovely. All right, mate. Well, we'll pause it there, and then we'll be back in a bit.
Okay, doke. Right. I'm going to do the belt in a minute, but I just want to do a little bit more of this texture stuff in some areas just to see if I can continue that look. Yeah, sometimes you get something in your head and you're liking it. And I just want to see if I can. I also in the break looked at a book that's got some bits on painting leather, and I thought I wanted to try bits of that kind, yeah, just to see if I could get more of that look. But I think on these random directions works better for some of these little lines and scratches and creases and irregularities in the this leather skirt thing. So I'm just putting a few extra bits. The more I see this, I can see little features, natural features in the model itself, but kind of almost crying out for a line and a divot the more you look into it. And the paint I'm using is quite thin, so it might go on looking quite bright, but once it dries, it's not as intense. And one of the key things about the way that look, it flows off a brush nicely, which is, acrylics with their nature of drying quickly means that having it quite fluid and quite thin and therefore watery means that you've got more time to use on it. Will go on the you can do more before you need to load the brush up again, basically. But like I say, it will come off a brush looking quite bright, but won't be so bright because it was thin by the time it dries. But I'm definitely liking the way this is looking. And just, even though I practiced and experimented with this earlier on, I'm liking it even more now compared to even when I was doing it earlier. I don't know if that's because the front has got better texture and more, than compared to the back. Probably. Maybe. The back is fundamentally boring, but there's a lot more interesting shapes and things you can see on that bit. But I'm not going to dwell on that now. We're going to move on. I'm going to turn the palette upside down because it works better for the camera, and we're going to do the belt. And remarkably, as I said, you can see the kind of more yellowy leather tones of the skirt. The belt is going to have a more reddish tone. I don't think the belt's quite finished now, so I'm going to use some cavalry brown, which has got a red tone to it, and plonk that. No dry brush for this. It's too small an area. It's too difficult an area. I couldn't. I wouldn't. No way could I get that to work successfully. It would be a disaster. And red leather, which is going more towards the orangey tones again, though, but not as orange as the parasite brown. A little bit of that. So it's those two. Still got some. Oh, I can just about see. There you go. Still got some of the brown, black, which I'm. You will notice I always go kind of from dark to light, or I start off with a base color that's a darker tone. That on its own. The cavalry brown on its own looks too bright. So I tend to use a darker colour in there just to desaturate it a little bit. But it also works towards the shadows as well. So yeah, this is the kind of slightly unexciting bit where I'm laying a base colour on with a slightly diluted brush or diluted paint.
You
Compared
could
to the bit,
choose to put a pattern in there or something.
I'm not. I'm going to try. Well, I'm going to do texture.
Okay.
Not dissimilar to what we've done already. But yeah, I'm not going to overcomplicate. I kind of think with this guy, he's a demon, and so patterns and things, I think will be lacking. He's kind of a brutal looking beast, so his aesthetic will be brutal, and any pattern or filigree or anything like that might look out of place on him. But compared to the belt at the back, there's a lovely kind of flow to the shape at the front, the way it goes under his belly. The bit at the back, when I was painting that, kind of felt a little bit difficult on how to paint it, how to highlight it, etc. Because it was so boring. But I think here we've got a little bit more going on. The way that's hanging, going underneath the belly, there's not much in theory going to be super bright highlight because it is hanging under his belly. But there is an area which can have some nice catch light on it. Gets difficult now because we're going under the arm, so just be careful on how you do that. I mean, in terms of getting the brush in, I'm kind of putting the brush in and pulling it outwards. I'm not poking the brush onto it. Keeping in control. Carefully doing that upper edge. And it's because it's got that brighter reddish colour, probably more so than the back at this point in time. It's quite catchy, actually. It has a little bit of liveliness to him. Although paint always goes on brighter than it dries, remember? So it's already toning down a little bit. Don't forget to twist him to get into those awkward spaces.
Your brush control is quite good. That's one thing I've noticed about you, Rob, is you don't tend to make any mistakes. Well, now I've said it. You don't seem to make any mistakes and start painting on the wrong parts. You obviously got a lot of. You got any tips on that?
I think, have I got any tips? If I'm trying to get in an area like, you can see the belt going underneath here. I can see where it's coming there. I can see where it's coming there. Now I've got a wing in the way. I've got a hilt in the way. So I'm very carefully, I'm putting my brush between, very carefully before I even touch the model. And when I think I'm in the right place, all I'm going to do is do one simple stroke. I'm not going to try and do that because it will probably go somewhere I don't want it to go. So take your time. If you've got something like this belt, it's got a natural flow to it. So I'll paint along the shape of what I'm painting. That might benefit in the way. They're kind of things that I'm kind of doing naturally and automatically. You can see I'm painting along the top. It might not be so obvious. sometimes you just want to stick the paint, get your brush onto the model, and just however that ends up being. But I'm actually not wedging my hand in anywhere at the moment because I'm trying to keep it on camera. So but I'm still all the time. My hands are wedged into one another, and I'm kind of You're seeing that, or you're seeing that, but there's a lot of this going on in order to keep a steady hand and make sure the paint is going in the right place. And if I do cock up and I do put the paint in the wrong place, and if it goes in the wrong place, my instant reaction is clean all the paint off a brush, and with a wet brush I'll go and just flood the area with paint where it's gone, not necessarily where I've been painting. So if it went on to his skirt, I'd put water on there and try and thin that paint and pull it away as much as possible until it thinned down, because you kind of catch it in that window before acrylic, when it dries, will be waterproof. So unless you then go in with a acetone or something. So, and I've just realised what we have with this as well. And then you've got these things we've got these two bits hanging down. Now I think I'm going to paint the ends of those brass in the end, because that will add a nice little bit of bright. So not a pattern as such, but it will have interest. And when the ends of those gets metallic, however, I'm not going to do any metallics until the very end. It'll be the last thing I do. I tend to my instinct when I'm doing anything like this is to try and keep my painting of metallics until the very last thing, because I don't want to get metallic pigment anywhere I don't want it, kind of thing, and getting in the way.
Yeah.
Be it in my water, or anything like that. Oh, sorry. Okay. And there's another bit up here, which is the other bit. And we're going to do true metallics, because that's what's in the tub. I'm going to try and make them a little bit more interesting. And I say true metallics as opposed to non-metallic metal that I've done on, which we did on the Dothraki.
Are you going to using any other washes?
Came
in the box.
I mucked around with the sepia wash earlier.
Oh yeah.
There is actually a little bit of sepia wash on here, which might come back to. But and I used it as a glaze as opposed to a wash. I wanted to control where it went, so I tend to rarely use a wash, and tend to use all paints as in the glaze. So I'll put this paint on now, and everything I do subsequently will be effectively small thin glazes of lines and things over top. So I've started to look at them. They're not something, I guess you could almost argue they're almost ink-like. Is that it? Yeah, there's an umber wash here. I think that's a sepia wash. Yeah, so both have been out. Umber wash I should try as well. Yes, I've looked at them. I haven't really quite decided how best to use them. Right. I'm now going to add some of the red leather to that base colour, so it's a little bit brighter. Thin it a little bit, not too much. I'm quite happy to do this in kind of what we're describing as that sketch So this can be, I can tone this down later. If I look carefully, you can just about see there on that belt, there are kind of creases going, or a line going sort of almost folds in it. That I'm just going to pick out and try and run the brush along. What we were saying before about, you can see it comes through the light of my light, or the reflection of my lamp is highlighting some of those bits where it comes up on the edge now. So I'm only putting this lighter colour on those kind of the area again, always thinking about the light coming down like this. And again, if you look at my brushwork, I guess you'd call it, I'm running along and so this is, here another thing about brushwork is, yes, I can run this along along the edge like that, but remember, I guess it's maybe a bit of a dirty fingernail, but when you've got a raised surface, I can use that portion of my brush, so not the tip, but that portion, and I can run that across the tip. You see that's left paint on the top of my fingernail. So although I'm not using exactly that bit of the brush, I can use the edge, the lower edge away from the tip, just to pick out that upper surface there, because it's got enough raised element to it. And then I've got this lovely, if you think about this under tie of this belt, and then you've got this bit. Now this bit is going to be in a bit more highlight because it's on an upper surface of his leg, whereas this one's a bit more in shadow, so it's not going to have quite so much brightness. I'm just going to do a big sweeping.
The ends, would they be a metal?
Yes, that's the bit I'm going to do brass. I'm planning to be brass, so that'll be a lovely kind of a yellowy metallic look on these areas. Is the plan. So you can see, hopefully, how on that side we've got some highlights coming in, and where it's a little bit brighter, then I haven't got quite so much underneath, and I haven't done it on that side. And you can see how that's looking darker of that belt, whereas that's got the start of the highlights coming in, just to contrast. What I'm going to do a little bit more of before I go and do the other side. I would normally do the other side, but for the purposes of this now, in order to illustrate, I'm going to add, I've still got on my, I've still got this here flesh colour, the elf flesh. It's on elf skin tone, and I'm going to use a little bit of that. I'm going to mix that in, so you can see you can see how we've gone from, that was the original colour, that's the kind of the first highlight, and we're kind of now got a brighter, slightly lighter colour, but it's not adding white, which would make it go way too pinky and chalky, and the flesh colour just adds keeps in tone with the original base colour. So now I can go back over here and put that in an area that's smaller in keeping it on the upper edge. We've got a little bit in the middle. You can see, that's working quite well. I'm going to take that a little bit into there. All that area under the arm doesn't matter if it doesn't get bright highlights. We're kind of I'm concentrating on where that's going up into this is me being a geologist, an anticline, and that's the syncline. So the top of the anticline is catching the most light, so that's where I'm putting these highlights, the brightest highlights. Partly because it just visually looks nice to be a little narrow zone of bright light catching it there. And rather than on this bit here of the leather belt end, I can do just a little bit of a highlight line on the edge. How and where you do that, I'm not entirely sure what's the best way to do it. What I'm going to do as well is I'm doing little tiny lines when we're sketching. Can you see there where it's in focus there? We just go quickly to a quick zoom. See if I can get that in. There you go. There. I was painting little. So little lines, painting from the inside out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I can overdo it a little bit. And I'll do a little bit on the inside. Oh, a little bit on the inside there. So again, it's so I can do that. How far can we zoom in here? So it's not super perfect. I'm going to do back out again, just to illustrate. I should be back to normal now. If you do too much on that, I can take some of this, say, middle highlight color, thin it down. This is me doing the glaze thing again. You can then paint a very simple, not a wash, just a simple glaze over top, and that will knock back that highlight when it dries. You can use that to tone down that highlight effect. What I'm also going to do here, while I wait for that to dry, what I want to do as well is separate, although it's the same material, it's the same thing, because the way it goes over the thigh and leg there, and it's got that upper surface, the line underneath I want to make darker, so it's clearly separate things, as it were, or it's separated. So I'm just going to take some of my black brown. I'm going to very carefully just paint that. And separate it out with a darker. I may go in and add a little bit of black in there later, or add black to the black brown just to darken that a little bit more, to separate it more. But you can see how that's now separated.
Yep, I see that.
I can go back in now and do more of that just on this very lower side, right in the bit that's the full shadow, really. And shadows don't have to be black. I'm going to do a little bit. Still going to not do that side yet. I'm still going to concentrate on this one side. Yeah, you can see how when you're painting and doing those highlights, that works. Yeah, again, you look at that side, that's brown, that's the colour we want it to be, that's fine. But by doing those highlight areas and shadows, that side suddenly gets a little bit more interesting, visually appealing, you could argue. Just makes you look at a little bit more, and it works well because of those crazy rib, muscular, weird patterns above that have been highlighted. So you've got a lot of interesting shapes and things on this guy to make that appealing. And you think when these bits end up being brass, and you know, I'll do them brass, but when I do them, I'm not intending just to do brass in the same way. This isn't brown or green. They're going to be interesting, or I'm going to try to make them interesting, or more interesting. But again, now I'm just going to have a little sip of this tea. I mean,
it's great, mate. Looks really good.
Yeah, you understand in the principle of how the light captures again. I mean, that's kind of a key thing. In fact, before I even started that, I didn't really realise how nice that could look.
Well, if you go back to the beginning of this video, if you watch it on YouTube, you can see how more 3D it is now with the colours. You almost like sculpted it using the paint, accentuating it.
Yeah, all you do. I mean, the thing is, the key thing about miniature painting is you can paint a thing and the light will catch it, and it will create natural highlights and shadows and things. You can see that on the wings there, and they're black. However, when you add these highlights and things, you can look at it in any lighting conditions and you'll see those highlights and shadows, and it will be interesting to look at in any way, shape or form. So that's where it gets, you're creating that extra depth to the piece by doing that. What next? I'm just going to do a little bit more on the lower portion of his belt.
Okay. And then what do you reckon we'll be doing next week?
Next week, I'm going to be ambitious. I'm going to do the wings. The intention is, what I'd like to be able to do with the wings, if we look, we can see some veins on the inside there. So my intention is to, using the colours similar to the tummy, do the main body of the wings. I want to do them with kind of a mixture of dry brushing texturing, using that way, and I can still see those you can see the horizontal lines there, which we'll have to be careful of, and then the the bones of the wings, the fingers of the wings, whichever way you want to look at it, they'll end up being green like this. So they'll be, and the idea is I want the kind of skin parts of the wings to have texture, interest, shape, pick out these veins going through it, and then have the green bits coming through. There's a lot of surface to do. Might just do one of the two wings to get that done.
Okay.
We shall see, but that is the intention, to make that exciting. What I'm going to do on this, same principle as the so yeah, same principle as the skirt thing. I've got this lighter portion of my highlight color, of my belt highlight color. And in areas where I quite like the brightness of the highlights in there, I'm just going to do little pick outs on the underside here, almost as little scratches and divots. It might not pop out much initially. It might take, I might not have gone too bright enough for it to be seen, but I'm still going to make little linear scratches across areas of it, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Might not even be, I can see it just about, but it's, yeah, you can see what I did on the back, in the sense I've got little linear shapes, and I don't think it's going to work so well on this surface, this side, because of the lovely curvature of it. It's a bit tricky to pull off.
It's difficult to see on that one, on there, Rob.
Yeah, I'm going to put some sort of like just slight shape variations, but this has got a bit more of a curious, or the curvature of it is nicer. Hard to explain, really.
A couple of minutes left now, Rob.
Okay. Yeah, so I will continue to do those highlights and stuff on this side to match, and then even now I can take the dark colour. I've probably got still got some of the blacker brown at the bottom here that I can, on the wet palette, just bring back to life with a little bit of water, and go in and separate out. There's, unlike this bit that's got the end of the belt, this is just belt on skirt, and that could probably do with a little bit of a darker separation because of the colours. But again, turn it upside down, whatever it might, whatever way helps you get into those crevices and shapes a little bit better. That's the key thing. We can mostly get away with when you turn it upside down like this, I can see that the black primer I've almost naturally left on this upper edge between the belt and his belly. But from this angle I can see that I still want to separate it out a bit more. So I've got some of the black colour, darkest black brown plus black to make it even darker. And I've got it quite relatively thin. and I have got. I'll say here that my forearm. Am I zoomed in? No, I'm not. My forearm is wedged against my desk, and my hand is wedged against my other hand, so that I can come in and, as you were saying, Malcolm, about that brushwork,
Mm.
that perception of where my brush is going to touch before I start that stroke coming down. It's an interesting observation because I think I've got better at that recently, probably through practice, because I've painted a lot more in the last few years. So,
Well, definitely through practice, but yes, it's quite remarkable how you can get those clean lines drawn. But I
yeah,
guess you're right. It's just clamping yourself down.
it is clamping, but like I say as well, you can you can get a piece. I half on about it, but I haven't got it here at the moment. But you can just a piece of card, and you can practice that kind of brush control, and just do that parallel lines.
Mm-hmm.
That's brush control, paint consistency, and you just get used to my fingers here. These fingers are touching that card when I do that, and so they are touching the base or the edge of the base or whatever when I'm painting these little details and things. And I'm perfectly happy to repaint something nowadays as well if it goes wrong.
So what colour are we going for the wings then next week?
Yeah, so my main thing will be, I think there's one of the illustrations has kind of like the fleshy colour, so it'll be a fleshy coloured, like his inner ear kind of thing, and shaded for the key part of the wings with green fingers.
Okay.
And that should add quite a pop to the way it looks. But I want to have texture, and like I say, with these, you can see the light catching on those veins. I'm probably going to do a few more veins on top of that, and do a 3D effect on using paint alone.
Mm-hmm.
So these will be picked out because they're there. And I'll also to try and do a few extra ones to illustrate how you can do shapes and things beyond that. So
brilliant.
So there you go. Okay,
well done, Rob. Thank you very much.
I'll do some. I'll take some posh photos next couple of days and put them up on the mess, so you can see what this looks like in a bit more detail. But
awesome.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you add a thing and suddenly he pops out a little bit more. So with the skirt and the belt, he's starting to really motor along, isn't he?
He is. Well, people watching on YouTube can skip straight to it now.
Yeah. Okie doke.
Cheers, mate.